Is there an echo or are we okay? I hear a little bit of echo. So I think we might be okay to go. We're going to hopefully keep this as a community practice with lots of opportunity for dialogue, but keeping your phone on mute while you're listening might be a good idea. It cuts down any echo. So we're going to go around and introduce ourselves first. Steve's on the call, and I'm Jamie Taylor with Cloudburst Group, and we'll just start with the Cloudburst team. I think Sarah and Rachel are there.
I'm Rachel Steed. I'm a contractor with the Cloudburst Group.
Hey guys, it's Sarah Kahn with Cloudburst.
And it looks like we have Dee. You're on. Want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. This is Dee Norton with the Road Home in Salt Lake City, Utah. I have with me joining us for this call Kevin Austin, who is our housing programs manager. He's been the one directly involved with our housing programs and the administration of them.
Oh, very forward-thinking, Dee. Welcome, Kevin. That's great for the shared housing discussion. It's great. And Margot, I think you're there too.
Yep, this is Margot Ackerman. I'm the Research and Evaluation Director at Homeward in Richmond, Virginia.
Great. And Andrea? Margot?
I'm not sure why I'm showing up as Margot and Andrea, but it's just Margot. It's a mystery.
You can put on your other voice. That's so great. All right. And Tim, I see you're on.
Yeah, my name's Tim Huffman, and I'm a professor at St. Louis University and helping the St. Louis region with basically its data capacity.
Great. And Becky?
Good afternoon. Sorry, I was muted. Yes, I'm Becky O'Mara, and I work with the Planning Council, which is in southeastern Virginia, and we are COC and HMIS lead for a few continuums in our area, and we're also working on the state of Virginia statewide data integration and data dashboard with Jamie and her team.
Yay. I think another member of our team's on. Is that Andrea Miller or a different Andrea? There's an Andrea on. No, Andrea and Andrea, they all want to be quiet today. Okay, good. And it looks like Michelle's here. Michelle Flynn. Michelle, you're on mute.
She was maybe going to be driving and would only be able to. Oh, hi.
Sorry. Hi, it's Michelle. Can you hear me now?
Yep. You're driving.
I'm on
so you're joining us.
I'm on my cell phone because I will be driving in about a half hour.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Great. Welcome from the wonderful state of Utah. And we have someone, Janice Olson. You're new to me, Janice. Are you able to introduce yourself? The road home. Look at that.
We can't figure out how to take our phones off.
No, you're off mute. I can hear you. You're off mute. Janice, are you able to intro yourself? Nope, I will. You're from the road home. This is what I know. And so that's okay. Go ahead. Michelle.
I was going to say this, Michelle. I invited Janice to join us. She's been our lead on shared housing in our agency, so I wanted her to be part of the hearing what you have to say today.
Oh, very good. You guys are forward planners. And really for anyone also to remember, they can always invite their fellow colleagues to these calls too, just like Utah's done, whenever you see appropriate. So we're going to share with you all today some really exciting findings from our shared housing work, but we're going to first just touch base on what we did last time, the secondary data use, which I'm just going to say, did people find it to be helpful? Just for 2 minutes or 1 minute on it. This is the one that, for me, one of the most exciting things to share with folks. And there was actually a whole site from Robert Johnson Foundation on health and housing materials or structural determinants of health that we're going to, Rachel and I from Cloudburst are going to review and then get back out to people. But did people find it to be helpful and most importantly, like useful in your own work? The secondary data, the eviction stuff we did, and then the secondary data set worksheet. No, not so helpful.
It's one of those things that we are still excited to get to and just have not had time to do. How it seems it always goes. You just have to find time to do it.
I know. I think someone might have their might be using their computer and causing a little bit of echo. So if you're not talking, you should probably put yourself on mute or computer mute also. But we're going to actually talk a little bit more about that in our next community practice, because we're going to be supporting each of you on the development of your own application of the community of what we're teaching, the data to action, these resources, and how to apply them in your own type of community practice. Sarah and I from Cloudburst will be, one or the other of us will be calling each of our sites to help prep you in the thinking about that, and also share again with you the resources, like review again the resources that we have shared. But I think that's our biggest problem that we're hearing, even from the racial inequities, wonderful training you got from Andrew Miller. I heard also from people that, again, about time, just using it in time. So we'll deal with that next month. I don't know how we'll deal with it. People need more staff, but nonetheless, I have to say I know that the secondary data stuff is useful. So just know it's there, and don't forget that when you need to go to it. But today we're actually going to focus on shared housing, and we hope to possibly get to alternative housing models. Rachel Steed's going to be our main presenter on this. Rachel and I were charged with almost 10 months ago, from SAMHSA to develop a white paper on shared housing and alternative housing models. And what's most cool about that is Paolo DeVecchio is the head of Center for Mental Health Services in SAMHSA. They have 3 centers. That's the biggest one. All the homelessness work falls under Center for Mental Health Services. And Paolo DeVecchio is the one who said he wanted this to happen because he really saw the mapping. One, housing is critical for people experiencing homelessness who also are experiencing have serious mental illness. That housing and housing options is one of the most critical stepping stones to health and well-being and behavioral health. And so he was actually the one who motivated this. There's an arc to this work that's going to continue. We're talking to funders very excitedly. With the white paper was actually submitted last Friday. It was complete to SAMHSA. SAMHSA is talking with HUD to have HUD be a co-publisher on this. We had an interagency advisory group reviewing this midway through the project, which included Brett from the SNAPS office, Brett Esler, and someone from USICH, and other SAMHSA staff. And so we are trying to continue to promote that federal cross-agency partnership around this and getting HUD on board because it is housing. But a toolkit is going to get developed out of this, funded by LA and San Diego, it looks like, which is very cool. Because what we know is that you guys do not have the time to actually implement all these ideas and may even forget to go to it. So it's a way of getting these resources out and in play across the country in an accessible way is our hope. So this is the goal that we were charged with, was really to go out and do a literature review and a scan on shared housing models and really identify emerging practices. Rachel, see what this still says, emerging best practices, but it is supposed to be promising practices. So this is something that was important, that they're not yet best practices, they're promising practices, because the whole field is actually still emerging in many ways. So some shared housing programs have been around for decades now and serving different populations. And really the goal of it was to increase housing options for vulnerable populations. So I think for this, it's what's really clear for everybody on this call. We need more housing options, so we don't actually have to go through this, because we understand the need for shared housing in every single market that's represented on this call. So I think we could switch through this slide to the next one, because what we want to share with you is what we discovered really in what we did. I'm going to pass this over to Rachel to talk a little bit about our methodology, and then walk you through some of our findings. So Rachel?
Super. Yeah, so hi everyone. Jamie already touched on the methodology, but basically we started first with a comprehensive literature review, primarily using Google and Google Scholar, and we restricted our searches to articles that were published from 2000 onwards, and we really focused on permanent housing. So we're going to delve more into the definition of shared housing later, but we really didn't look at anything that was transitional. We want to focus on permanent housing. And then there's a table here that shows you the population characteristics and the housing model types. So we just did a search combining all those various search terms to see what we would find. And what we found was there really wasn't a great deal of peer-reviewed literature on this topic, because it is such a new and emerging field, but there were quite a few reports and gray literature that we found that were useful in moving us forward. So from there, we then did key informant interviews. So we did an environmental scan across the nation to try and find what was happening locally on the ground everywhere in both shared housing as well as alternative housing. And we interviewed 14 shared housing providers and 6 alternative housing sites, which we'll delve into more detail later on. And then, as Jamie said, we had an advisory council meeting where we presented all of our findings to a roundtable group that consisted of SAMHSA, HUD, and USICH representatives to get their feedback on our findings and help us shape the direction of the white paper that we then completed, knock on wood, last Friday, which was really exciting for us. And we're really hoping that this is a stepping stone for national scale up and for knowledge sharing. And the toolkit that's going to come out of this is going to be really, really useful, we envision, for state and local agencies. So this map shows you the locations of the shared and tiny housing projects that we found. So the yellow stars with the blue outline, those are the projects that we actually had the chance to interview. And then the other yellow stars are projects that are on the National Shared Housing Resource Center website that we did not interview, primarily because not all of the projects, in fact, most of the projects did not serve our target population, which was individuals experiencing severe mental illness. So many of the shared housing projects actually targeted elderly people or single mothers. So if their population of focus was not those who were experiencing chronic homelessness or SMI, we didn't interview them, but we did still explore their websites and read their reports to really gain a better understanding of the entire national landscape. And then the green stars with the blue outline, those are the tiny house villages that we interviewed. And then the other green stars would be the other tiny house villages that we came across through our literature review. So we will explore more what the meaning of that is later on in the presentation. So for us, when we talk about the word shared housing or the term shared housing, there is no official definition, but for the purpose of our project, this is how we defined it. So it was 2 or more people who were living in a permanent rental housing unit, and permanent being really the key word in there. It wasn't people or families that were doubling up or couch surfing. And the people who lived together permanently, they were sharing housing costs. So there are many types of populations that are served by shared housing. So it can be single adults, veterans, families, youth. We even saw different grandparent and grandchild programs for shared housing. So it really is serving a diverse cross-sector of the population. And there really is no standardized or fidelity model at this point, but there are many interesting things that are happening on the ground that really work, which is why we're calling them emerging promising practices rather than best practices. We feel from our research and that shared housing can definitely meet the needs of people experiencing chronic homelessness, and a lot of lessons learned from the programs can be adapted to serve that population when operated with permanent supportive housing best practices. And that's a really key, important part of this, that we did find time and time again that the shared housing for people experiencing chronic homelessness really only worked well when it was operated with permanent supportive housing best practices. So now we thought we'd just open it up for a bit of discussion, and we're wondering if anyone on the call has experience implementing shared housing programs. Or is anyone aware of any shared housing programs that might be in their state that they themselves aren't implementing?
This is Michelle with the Road Home. We've done a few different kinds of shared housing programs. The one that we are working on now is in conjunction with our Pay for Success program. And we are doing roommates in rental apartments with that program. It's geared towards single, persistently homeless, not quite chronically homeless individuals. And it's been in the format of private apartment rentals with rapid rehousing subsidies. And we do roommate matching forms. We can have two roommates that are part of the program, or someone who's part of the program can bring in another roommate that might not be part of the program. So we have some flexibility there. And I'm trying to recall how many people we have in that. I think we have probably somewhere around, I don't know if Janice can speak up, but maybe a dozen or so roommate situations in that program right now.
Is that rapid rehousing, Michelle?
It is rapid rehousing, but it's sort of enhanced rapid rehousing in a way. So it's just, because it's a Pay for Success program.
Was that Michelle who left us?
Yeah, it sounds like we lost her.
This is Dee.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I can maybe add a couple things here. I believe that we've only had about 6 or 7 total people that have been able to experience that shared that roommate program. It's been challenging to get off the ground and get fully mobilized, and we're still relatively early in our program while we're working through this. So there's been a lot of development along the way that we've been working through.
Do you want to share some of your challenges, Dee?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Kevin to talk about that. Yeah, I'll ask Kevin here to talk a little bit about that for us.
So, hi guys, this is Kevin. The major challenge has been trying to get, well, I guess there's kind of two. We did some surveys internally here with the shelter guests that we have to gauge the amount of interest that they might have on trying to get out of shelter and move into a shared housing situation. It was the results were a little mixed, where the preference for most individuals was to certainly not have a roommate, but when you ask the question of if it would increase the speed in which you can move out of shelter and into permanent housing if you had a roommate, then we actually got quite a bit of people that said that they would at least like to explore that option. And so we created a roommate matching tool and we're trying to implement that in a way so that we can make sure that we aren't just choosing two random individuals that might even say they are friends and want to move in together, but we're digging in a little deeper to make sure that, like, if one of the people has a pet or maybe likes to smoke or drink or something, and the other people wouldn't be okay with that, then we try and make sure that we aren't trying to pair those two individuals up to move into shared housing. And that's been a little bit more difficult than I think we anticipated. I did have a little bit of experience in like college housing or school housing, and we had the similar type tool, and it seemed to work a little bit better, but that's obviously a completely different population. I think, and then one of the other main challenges is a lot of the property managers and landlords throughout the county that we operate in, they aren't necessarily opposed to renting to roommates, but I think in a handful of the times that we've been able to actually utilize one of our programs with these landlords, they aren't always super willing to draft and sign different leases for each individual. They just want them on the same lease, which can obviously be problematic if one of or two of the individuals in the household maybe don't want to pay rent, or maybe heaven forbid relapse or something like that. And so instead of it being a placement that's lost for just one individual, it's a placement that could be lost for both or all three, depending on the amount of roommates. And so that's been one of our major challenges. We have also been working with shared housing situations with a PSH program that we have. It's actually, and we had, I think, 2 different households that were comprised of 3 people each in those households, and they were American Indians, the individuals that we were putting in those shared housing, and that actually seemed to work out really well for those individuals. I think I covered everything.
I'm just laughing from your just a very small survey into shared housing, relatively small. It's a model that works for American Indians. I like that, but I think what we can help you with is very much directly. There's going to be some resources in the PowerPoint here, but I would like to make sure that we connect you directly to the women who we spoke with in Environmental Scan running MICA housing services for chronically homeless people moving into shared housing, and also Share LA. And you're going to see them featured, but somebody take responsibility for emailing me and Rachel, and we'll get you the name and contact of those people. And the other thing is there are 2 roommate sharing mobile apps. At least one's a mobile app that LA Family Housing just developed. They were funded by Hilton Foundation. That might be, you might want to test out or talk with them, Chris Freed, and we'll also give you her name. And then San Diego, who Chris Coons was going to be on this call, they're actually doing a roommate matching. But I think it would really benefit even a group call. Maybe that's what we'll do. We'll set up a group call, because there are lessons to be learned that are existing in other sites right now that I think would really help you guys in what you're doing. You have a great platform for it. But there's lessons that we learned on these other sites that I think might be really helpful in different ways. So we'll follow up with that after.
Okay, this is Janice from the Road Home. Those resources would be great. We'd love to be connected with them. And I just wanted to answer, sorry, I had some technical difficulties. No one could hear me. I wanted to answer the question about the Pay for Success program earlier. It is a rapid rehousing program, but like Michelle was saying, it's enhanced in that the intervention is a multidisciplinary team. So we have housing locators, case managers, a therapist, and an employment specialist. And the team can work with the individuals for as long as they need to work with them.
Okay, that's good. We heard another, I presented this summer at the National Alliance, and there was a woman there presenting, I want to say from West Virginia, but who's also running a rapid rehousing, shared housing program too, successfully running that. So Janice, maybe you're the one who contacts us I think we'll actually set up a peer sharing discussion, and really anyone could join it, because I think it would be best to get that whole group together. I think that's a good idea. Jason,
that would be great.
Anyway, yeah. So we'll do that. Rachel, that sounds like a good idea, right, Rachel? We had a lot of fun talking to these folks. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, especially Jason from Share LA has got a wealth of information. So that would be really good.
There's an encyclopedia on shared housing, literally, and a zealot, a missionary zealot. So you'll be sold to do much, much more. So.
We could use an encyclopedia, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, on that note, does anyone else have anything to share regarding personal experience with shared housing? Because if not, we can move into talking a bit more about the aspects of the models. Okay, I think we're good. So we basically divide shared housing into two types of models. They each have home providers and home seekers. So your home provider can be your homeowner, it could be a private landlord or an agency landlord, and then your home seeker is the person who is seeking housing. So you can either have home sharing, which is where a homeowner rents out a room in their own house, but they remain living there. So the programs that we saw that were this model were primarily get an elderly homeowner who might have cash flow challenges and decide that they want to rent out a room to augment their income. These organizations also, interestingly, offered service exchanges. So somebody might be elderly and they want to rent out a room, but they don't need additional income. What they really need is somebody to help them drive them to doctor's appointments, or help them with chores, or help them with cooking. So we saw both financial exchanges as well as service exchanges, or even combinations of both that occurred when the homeowner was renting out a room in their own residence. The other type of shared housing, which is the type that we focus primarily on in this paper and presentation, is where an apartment or house with multiple bedrooms is rented out to a group of home seekers who will then live in a roommate type environment. So generally these apartments have multiple bedrooms, usually 1 to 4 bedrooms, and the matching process can vary. So the home seekers can be matched by an organization, or the home seekers could be a group themselves, have already created their own match of who they want to live with, and then come to a landlord or come to an organization and say, hey, can you help us find a housing unit? We already have a group together. So those are sort of the variations on the models that we saw throughout our research. So as I was just explaining, you have home sharing, which is when a homeowner rents out a room in exchange for monetary compensation or service, or roommate matching. The roommate matching is what we're going to focus primarily on in the coming slides. But this diagram just shows the relationship between the home seeker, the landlord, and the intermediary organization. And by intermediary organization, we primarily mean the homeless service provider, who would serve to link the home seeker and the home provider and facilitate the matching and the tenancy agreements, as well as the conflict mediation services that we'll touch on later on. So shared housing really does work for people experiencing chronic homelessness. That's really what is so exciting about this and about our findings. These photos are from Share LA, the person we just mentioned earlier, Jason, who is the project coordinator there. And these are actual photos of homes in the LA region, where people share a bedroom. So this is the only example we came across where 2 people would actually share a bedroom, and then there would be multiple bedrooms within a house. And the houses were chosen because they were a closed sort of concept house, so a lot of small spaces within the house where people could have privacy, but a shared bedroom which prevented people from retreating to their bedroom and isolating, so it was a really great model for people experiencing SMI. So this is just more detail about that project, Share Collaborative Housing in LA. They've been operating since 2005, and they've had over 150 houses during that period, about 50 currently. 80% of the residents are chronically homeless, and they have a matching process where the staff suggests vacancies depending on the individual's needs, and then a conference call is actually established between the homeowner, the person who is seeking housing, and the staff member, and this can result in almost immediate placement, because sometimes examples were given where the homeowner would actually go and pick up a home seeker and bring them to the house that very day. So it's been super successful. Very high percentage of residents who voluntarily attend self-help groups. There's no preconditions. And 26% of people with SMI get jobs in a year. It's a no-fail environment. So it's barrier-free. There's only been one homeowner who ever filed eviction paperwork, and then there was conflict mediation that was able to occur in that case, and the person didn't even end up being evicted. So it is really exciting. One of the ways that SHARE reaches out and engages landlords is they are able to offer rents above market rate, because the landlord has to agree to furnish the home, to provide all the utilities, the internet, the TV, and agree to rent out to people who, may have barriers to housing from who other landlords might not want to rent to. So by the landlord working with the SHARE personnel, they get this extra kind of level of security that they are going to have an intermediary organization they can reach out to in the event of any possible problems or challenges that occur, which really gives them peace of mind that this is going to be a smooth relationship going forward, and that intermediary relationship really does make things much more successful. So another
I want to bring up on that one.
Yep.
Rachel, going back to SHARE. So one of the things we're going to talk about, because we pulled it out of here and we put it on a later slide, the SHARE staff, their support staff for shared housing with peer bridgers, who are, they call them peer bridgers, but they're people who are peer support staff who have lived experience themselves. So the 80% of their residents are people who are chronically homeless with mental health issues or behavioral health issues. So that peer bridger support person for SHARE LA is highly, highly active, as you're going to hear. And we're going to bring it back up into the slide to make sure staffing is shown here, because this is a hugely successful shared housing program. And the peer bridger as a staffing support person may be a key part of that success. So it's really important to see that when you're doing shared housing, even in Utah for your project, to learn more about this peer bridger position might be super helpful. It might be the mechanism that actually makes a lot of that successful for the landlords in LA. Mm-hmm. But we're going to talk about it later, but we should bring it up into this slide. We're evolving the slideshow as we go, but we should bring a mention of it into the slide too.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And just to build upon that, the fact that peer bridger has lived experience is so key, because the people who live in these homes, they want to feel like it's their home. So when SHARE LA actually explored the option of having property managers, it was a huge failure, because the residents then felt like they had somebody who was watching them or not spying on them, but they felt that they didn't have personal control over their own home and their own space. They had to sort of live in this hierarchy relationship with the property manager, versus when they used the peer bridger, it was really perceived as somebody who was an equal with lived experience who could have some of the roles of a property manager, but without that oppressive authoritarian presence. So that, which was a really interesting lesson learned. Mm-hmm. So just moving on from that SHARE example, another really interesting case study that we explored was Ecumenical Ministries in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And this group would actually do outreach to street homeless populations, and they would find people who were already living together in encampments on the street and build upon those existing relationships by asking those groups if they would like to live together in an apartment as roommates. And they found that that matching process was really successful, because you already had this lived experience of people creating dependency relationships and living together and negotiating the challenges of being on the street together. So, and even more so, they found that if they match an individual with SMI with someone who may have either a more severe or a lesser degree of SMI, that you can create an informal caregiver relationship that also seemed to work well. which for them was a really exciting and unexpected finding. So they've been very successful. Less than 10% of people in their program return to homelessness, and they work directly with landlords who are willing to overlook common barriers to housing. They've found that pairs work much better than groups of three, just in their experience. It seems that with groups of three, you can sometimes have an odd man out scenario. So just the pairs can reduce that dynamic and that chance of additional conflict. So those are all lessons learned that we found to be very valuable. A third example from Connecticut is Pacific House. And they are unique in that in Connecticut, the state had several tax stimulus programs and dollars where buildings that were in foreclosure could be bought and renovated. So this is what Pacific House did in Stamford. They bought derelict buildings and they renovated them. So then they improved the community where the building was located through revitalization. And their model was that although there were multiple bedrooms in the apartment, each bedroom had a private bathroom. Because from what we've heard through a variety of interviews is that the primary sources of conflict are the kitchen and the bathrooms, surrounding issues of cleanliness, time use. So if you can reduce conflict by having private bathrooms, it's really worth the added investment, which was really interesting. Other things that reduced conflict were having a TV in each bedroom, we're having a lock on doors, even having small mini fridges in the bedrooms just gave people more privacy and reduced the conflicts that took place in the kitchens. So Pacific House's program includes comprehensive case management and serves chronically homeless individuals. And one of the other aspects that's interesting about Stamford is that there's really strict zoning rules. So wherever shared housing programs are implemented, it's important to understand the zoning because many cities and counties limit the number of unrelated adults who can live together. So in Stamford, a maximum of 4 unrelated adults can live together, meaning that the largest units they would make would be 4-bedroom units because in their model, each person had their own bedroom. So as well in the Stamford case, the neighborhood revitalization was a really important process because people weren't being isolated in buildings that were branded as, you know, buildings where only people who were chronically homeless live. These are buildings that are mixed throughout the neighborhood, so you really don't have NIMBYism. There's nothing on this building that identifies it as somewhere where someone who was previously experiencing homelessness or experiencing SMI lives, which really facilitates community integration, which is super, super important. So now our last case study is going back to that other form of home sharing that we referred to earlier, where you have somebody who owns a home and very often they're elderly and they want to rent out a bedroom inside that home. So there's many organizations that are doing this. This is a photo from Home Share Now in Vermont, where this organization has had over 12,000 hours of service exchange as part of their home sharing agreement since 2017. And although they do not serve chronically homeless individuals specifically, 85% of their clients are low income. So they do serve some people who may have experienced homelessness in the past, although they may not be defined as chronically homeless. They've been really successful, 115 matches since 2017. So this is definitely a model that works. And their fundamental principles are that it has to be a person-driven process, really dependent on transparency and disclosure, meaning that in the initial meetings between the home owner and the home seeker, where they just kind of discuss their deal breakers and their characteristics, the matches that really work are the matches where people are super transparent and honest from the beginning. You know, am I going to have music on till late at night, or am I messy, am I clean, do I have pets, am I going to have overnight guests? And the more information you can get at the very beginning, the greater the likelihood of the match succeeding for a long time. They also have a professional mediator on staff, and they would have very frequent check-ins, daily, then weekly, then bi-weekly, with both the homeowner and the home seeker, so that any potential conflicts or issues could be dealt with really early, right as they emerge, and not kind of left to simmer under the surface. So this program, as well as several others, also has trial matches. So you would have maybe 2 weeks or a month where you would be matched, and if it wasn't working for either party, then the person would be rematched to another location. So it's kind of a no-fail trial period, which is also a great tool. So now we want to... go ahead.
Before you do that, Rachel, I want to say another factor, like in our environmental scans that we did, and we talked to quite a number of people doing home sharing and also the alternative housing. The common factor we found with literally, I would say everyone we talked to, actually, they are driven by this mission. They believe in shared housing as a model. Like, it is not just a supplemental program to their projects. It is like the people running these projects were driven by getting shared housing out as successful, like to do whatever it takes. And they had different approaches. They were serving different populations. Some of them even had, there was one that was very, very religious-based, very faith-based. Some were not housing first. But there was this common thing that I thought was really interesting, that's kind of, again, missionary zeal, of which Jason by far is the highest level. But anyway, that's a part of it. And I think that's in part, if you're going to do this and expand it in your own program, find someone who has a missionary zeal for shared housing that helps you do it, because that was really a big energy piece. This is still an emerging practice. There's still a lot of beliefs against it. But I think that is actually some successful strategy to take forth on our findings. And Rachel?
Super. Yeah, no, definitely, Jamie. I agree. There is passion throughout the field, and a lot of lessons can be learned through the dedication of those people on the ground, which we tried to capture. So it was really exciting to hear that. So going back to this discussion, we wanted to find out what you see as potential issues or roadblocks with shared housing programs before we get into the nitty-gritty of the detailed components. Does anybody have any thoughts on,
Well, this is Michelle. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm driving. We did a survey of people experiencing homelessness to talk to them about housing stuff. And you'll remember the details, but one of the things that came out of that was there's a pretty strong answer to the question about shared housing in the negative. And so I think one of the challenges that we have is both, certainly selling it to the potential participants, but even selling it to funders and partners when they're hearing from the clients that they don't want to be in shared housing.
Mm-hmm. I think that's why we want to set up a follow-up call, Michelle. Maybe you're dropped then, but we want to connect you from Utah with, because you're implementing now, and we want to set up a call that actually brings in Jason from LA, the woman from Micah, also the people from LA, Chris Freed, who's developed the roommate sharing mobile app, and then Chris Coons, who's developed something in San Diego, which is a roommate matching process. That might be a mobile app, I'm not sure. But we want to bring you together with them because they can meet you with where you're at and have some very on-the-ground strategies for some of those issues, because they're serving the same population. So I personally don't want to share my house either, but if you approach it in a different way, I might answer differently. But we do want to follow up with a call like that, because we want you to see how we learned in this process over and over again, that kind of breakthrough. And some of that has to do with that missionary people that are going to see it through, but they saw it through in ways, the places where Rachel brought up in the very beginning, the places where shared housing model for people who are experiencing chronic homelessness and serious mental illness, where they're successful, they're applying the best housing first PSH standards. So we want you to also get some of that energy and learning. So we're going to do that as a group call. And anyway, if there's anyone else on the call who wants to join Utah, like, I don't know if Margot or if anyone else is really seriously interested in expanding their shared housing or starting it, just email us and we'll bring you into that group call as a follow-up of this call.
And just to add on those points too, one of the major issues we found through the interviews was the rebranding of shared housing. Many people, when they hear shared housing, they instantly think of a shelter environment or a group home environment where they don't have choice who they're living with. And we found that the successful shared housing programs are the ones that are, the foundation is client choice, where the individual chooses who they want to live with. They're not merely put in a unit because there's an available bedroom. And that really was a key factor for determining whether the program would be successful or not, was that client choice aspect.
What time are you going?
Okay, does anyone else have any comments or any potential, can you guys think of any potential strengths of shared housing programs? Okay, well, we can move on from here. So we're going to move on and we're going to delve into the real components and promising practices of the shared housing programs that we explored. So once again, the projects vary tremendously based on where they're located and the target population and the intermediary organizations involved, as well as the type of funding, because each state has such different types of funding for the intermediary organization, which can make or break a program. So we're going to just dive into some of the promising practices. So the first major challenge or important aspect is finding homeowners and home providers who are willing to rent. So for home sharing, you want to find homeowners who want to rent instead of sell. So often these are older individuals who may need assistance maintaining their home, or they could be in transition. And as we stated earlier, in LA, one way to really recruit those homeowners is to offer them higher than market rates and to look for houses that were closed concept floor plans, which in the LA housing market actually were less desirable for many families because many modern homes, open concept, bright and airy is really what's desired. But the closed concept, older homes with a lot of smaller private spaces are better for this type of shared housing model. So it's kind of reaching out to homeowners who might be challenged and not able to sell, or to homeowners who want to rent instead of sell. And sometimes this means offering incentives. Maybe you have homeowners in your program who are very happy with home sharing. So you offer them an incentive. It could be a small gift card or even a raffle to go out and find friends or other homeowners who might want to participate in the program. So it's really a lot of word of mouth, as well as a lot of community resource agencies and marketing through referral networks to try and find homeowners and home providers. So yeah, just as we mentioned, raffles of gift cards, intermediate organizations, councils on aging, and meeting with home providers and homeowners once a year. So really ensuring that you stay in touch with your homeowners and you're able to address any concerns that they have, and yeah, just kind of continue to evaluate the program, make sure that you build those relationships and you continue to feed the relationships with the home providers. An interesting comment that we heard through many interviews is that the home providers see themselves helping the community with the homeless population. Even if it's an elderly person who is renting a room for additional income, they still feel that they are helping a greater good and working in the community. So it's kind of an interesting thought process that was mentioned frequently. So these are additional strategies for finding home providers and landlords, utilizing local media and property management databases. It could be real estate firms. Actually, in the case of Share LA, the program has been so successful that they've actually had people who want to invest and buy homes that will be utilized for the process of shared housing programs, because the homes are rented at slightly above market rates, and these are investors who really want to do socially responsible investing, and they see this as their way to contribute to the LA housing crisis. Other types of advertising could be direct mailer campaigns, and possibly at a policy level, offering tax breaks for landlords and homeowners who want to participate in shared housing programs. One of the things that's really important to make landlords feel more comfortable is that relationship between the intermediary organization and the landlord. So really having firm memorandums of understanding between the two, so the landlords really understand they will have support throughout the whole process and won't just be left to fend for themselves. So now we wanted to talk about matching. So matching is really important. The more time spent in the front, carefully screening and matching people, the greater the likelihood of success of the match lasting. That was what we saw without exception, basically through every single call that we had and program that we read about. So really having a detailed matching questionnaire, looking at personality traits, preferences, deal breakers, and then doing an in-person interview between the people who might be considering living together and home visits, and really detailed background checks as well. So looking at criminal history, employment history, housing references, and then facilitating those introductions between the roommates who might want to live together or the house seeker and the home provider in a home sharing relationship. So as Jamie was saying, there are now apps that have been developed to really facilitate this matching process, as well as numerous questionnaires. So it's really ensuring that the most research and time is spent initially trying to match people. We can't stress that enough. Three-way conference calling was
Rachel,
something that we, yep, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask about the reference and background check. So is that information provided to the roommates? Like, do I get information about the person that I want to live with? You give me a copy of their criminal record, their employment history, and all that, or how does that work?
In the cases that we saw the background checks, that was primarily in the situations where you had a homeowner who was renting out a bedroom to one individual, and the background screening was more because the homeowner wanted to ensure that they weren't renting out the room to somebody with a criminal history. The roommate matching programs, we didn't see anything that did have those background checks, and I think that's because the roommate matching programs are really a housing first principle, and especially if you're taking people who've been living together on the street, then the information wasn't ever shared between roommates. It was more the landlord would occasionally do the background checks, or in the case of homeowners, they would do the background checks just to ensure the safety of the person who'd be moving into their home. So I don't know, Jamie, if you have anything else to add related to that.
No, but obviously they built that cost into their shared housing program, and paid for those. But for the people that were presenting it was very important for them to have that, and important in their landlord relationship piece.
So it sounds like that in that situation, that having, a serious criminal history or something like that could be a deal breaker for some people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But again, what Rachel was saying is that was for people who are people who are sharing a room in their home. So people that are doing that for monetary reasons or even loneliness reasons of their own. But that was where we saw that. I honestly think, Margot, if you should join our call that we're going to hold with Cheryl LA and Micah. They don't have a formal background check like that they spoke of, and you can ask them why on that call. I think it's a good question.
Yeah, I'd like to be a part of it. Thanks, Jamie.
Mm-hmm. And that also brings up another point that was a concern for some of the intermediary organizations, and that was the liability issues when you do match people together. So that's one of the reasons that many of the intermediary organizations don't want to be on the lease. They want the lease to be directly between the landlord and the individual seeking a home, because if they then are on the lease, if the homeless service provider takes on the lease, and they take on a lot more legal responsibility as well. So it will be interesting to discuss that in further detail with Micah and with Jason, but definitely concerns over legal liability were brought up in conjunction with these background checks. So just continuing on about principles of matching. So it's really important that it's a person-centered process. Ideally, if you have a large staff in your homeless service organization, you'd have a housing navigator who would get to know the home seeker's preferences and deal breakers and really understand where they are not willing to compromise. As we stated earlier, it's crucial that the foundation be client choice and striving to maintain existing relationships. So what Micah is doing by offering people the opportunity who live together on the street because they have created these relationships of interdependency and then moving those into roommate situations, that can work really well. Take time. Don't just put people in spots because there's a vacancy. Really take time to make sure that you pick people or suggest matches based on the individual deal breakers. And then having a trial period. So having a 1 to 4 week trial period where individuals can be moved if the match is not working. And then from there, it's really important to have formalized tenancy agreements. So one thing that's very important, as was addressed by someone earlier on the call, that you want to have each individual person have their own lease with the landlord, because if somebody leaves early or if somebody, then you avoid one roommate being left with the bill or having to pay for a utility when someone else might not be contributing their share. So it's just much easier if you have a lease that includes all expenses, and then that lease is between the landlord and each individual person who's living in that property. And on the positive side for the landlord, then the unit is always making money. So you might have a situation where one person leaves and you still have 2 people there. Well, you're not making the full rent, but at least the entire unit isn't completely empty, so you're not losing 1 or 2 months rent. Roommate agreements. So once you have gone through the comprehensive process of matching, you then have roommates who agree on a set of rules and responsibilities and identify their deal breakers, and they both sign on sort of a code of conduct of how they're going to agree to live together. And the processes that will occur if conflicts do occur. And then you want to have a memorandum of understanding between the homeless service provider or the intermediate organization and the landlord, which really outlines the roles and responsibilities, what's included in the rent, the level of support, the contact and conflict mediation processes, maximum occupancy, because you don't want landlords to then, just have an unlimited amount of people they can cram into one space. You really want to make sure that all the fair housing laws are abided by. So that's all addressed in that MOU. And then lastly, you want to have a participation agreement between the homeless service provider or the intermediary organization and the home seeker. So this could just include things like permission to enter the program, release of liability, contact information, permission for the various background and employment checks that you're going to do if that's something that your organization wants to do, depending on your target population. And then the roles and responsibilities of the intermediate organization and the home seeker themselves. So here's a whole bunch of different bullet points for things that could be included in the roommate agreement, and we won't go through them all, but basically it really just does relate back to that initial roommate screening. So just reiterating a lot of those deal breakers and specific items inside the roommate agreement. So things like smoking, bathroom use limitations, overnight guests, what items are shared, what items are private, and just as detailed as you can be, because this is a tool that is often referred back to when conflicts do arise, to create just a written record for personal accountability. And then another promising practice is it's really important to have training for homeowner hosts when the home seekers are going to be people with a history of chronic homelessness or people who are experiencing SMI. So just training landlords in trauma-informed care, PTSD, nonviolent communication, conflict resolution, because many landlords may not be familiar working with these populations. So it's just important to kind of give as much education information on the front end as possible to reduce the likelihood of conflicts arising just from lack of experience. And then ideally in your perfect world, if you had an intermediate organization with a limitless budget, this is what your staff qualities would be. So you'd have a housing navigator who would be responsible for working with the home seeker. You'd have a housing liaison who would be working with a landlord to find available housing units. Then you would have housing stabilization staff who would be there to do some of the follow-up and ensure that there wasn't conflict or reduce likelihood of conflict or mediate strategies when conflict did occur. And then you'd have a network of referrals for any other self-help groups or peer networks, behavioral health services as needed. And then the training for staff and volunteers, similar to what we saw as the training for landlords, just a solid background in housing first, trauma-informed care, and other really important concepts that that I'm sure all homeless service providers are utilizing on a day-to-day basis as a goal anyways. Some of the interesting ones that we hadn't thought about were identification of domestic violence and sex trafficking victims. That was brought up by the slide of the Shared Learning Clinic of Ian DeJong and Chris Free. And just managing the expectations of all parties, just ensuring clear, transparent communication between everyone involved is really an important part of being successful. Okay, and then Jamie, did you want to touch on the housing stabilization strategies?
Yes, these are all the things we already know that work well. The one big one that stood out that was very unusual on housing stabilization was Share LA. They actually focus every single person in the shared housing program develops a 5-year action plan. Like imagine chronically homeless folks coming into housing and shared housing, and they're developing a 5-year plan for success. And what they found is by articulating their 5-year goals and then working backwards to short-term goals, you are really supporting the capacity for folks to visualize a new reality. They also are tracking self-help groups, and they work on connecting what folks have in their 5-year plan with self-help groups. And so it obviously depends what type of self-help group, but that's a big part of their own action planning for clients. But we thought it was actually really interesting to hear why the 5-year plan of success could and did work so well. And next slide. And here's a peer bridger we talked about. They're working with folks as a kind of intensive case management, I would say. And this place where many of us have that flight pattern in ourselves or fight pattern in ourselves when conflict happens, and people with trauma have that even to the more extreme. Really allowing the peer bridger to support their own experience to be able to deal with conflict is another. It would be great to research that impact actually over time. But anyway, the peer bridger piece is really critical, I think, as we move forward. And unrolling this out in our toolkits will put a much higher frame onto peer bridger, I think, for this population. Next slide. I'm going to let you do funding. You did this well. You know this better than me, actually, Rachel.
So the way that the shared housing really works is, especially when you're targeting individuals experiencing severe mental illness, is that if a person is paying on average $400 to $500 per month in rent, then two people together with, say, $1,000 a month can generally afford a unit at a market rate, because their income that they may be receiving through SSI or SSDI, it can often be in the $700, $800, $900 a month range. So as one individual, they may not be able to afford an apartment, but 2 or 3 individuals together can afford somewhere. So that's, from the funding and cost effectiveness aspect of shared housing, one of the reasons that it is a really useful and promising model going forward. So some organizations will master lease units, buying a building, renovating it, and then renting directly to the individuals who are seeking housing. This will just depend really on each state's environment for tax credits and funding. One of the downsides of this is it transfers more risk to the intermediary agency, but it also means you don't have to work with landlords. It can just be directly the intermediary agency leasing directly to the home seeker. So there are positives and negatives definitely to that model. Medicaid waiver funding can be used in some states. So Vermont particularly, under the home sharing model where a homeowner rents a room to a home seeker, the programs that were the intermediate organizations there received Medicaid waiver funding because the homeowners are able to stay in their homes longer because they are getting, in many cases, the service assistance, whether it be transportation to appointments, light housekeeping, that's allowing them to stay in their homes and avoid the expenditure of Medicaid dollars that would occur if they've moved into some type of nursing or long-term care facility. SSI is allowed to pay rental fees, so that can, people on SSI do qualify for shared housing. Let me see here. Yeah, veteran benefits can also be used for shared housing as long as the veteran name is on the lease and the rent is proportional to the space leased, meaning benefits, if there's one veteran in a 3-person shared housing, his benefits or her benefits would be responsible for a third of the lease. Their benefits couldn't be used for 2/3 of the lease. It's just the proportion of the space that they're occupying. And then there needs to be a greater research on the impact of shared housing on diverse levels of benefits, whether it be Section 8 or SNAP, because depending on how the lease is structured or the pieces of the person's expenditures that are shared, this could potentially impact some forms of direct assistance. So there needs to be a greater research and policy review related to that. So HUD does allow for funding of shared housing according to these conditions. So HUD will fund subleases for permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. The guidelines for their emergency solution grants and continuum of care programs are listed here. So shared housing is permitted when the resident is homeless at entry and meets income eligibility, when each tenant has his or own separate 12-month lease, when tenants have choice regarding with whom they live, when rental units meet habitability standards, and when the unit meets fair market rent and rent reasonableness standards. So now we thought we'd break up the presentation and ask, how would you see yourself sharing this information in your community, and what kind of funding do you think you would need to be able to be an implementer or an intermediary organization? Anybody have any ideas or challenges, thoughts? Oh.
This is Margot. I'll say something. I don't really have any experience with this or anything like that, but I do know that we're really focused on our low exits to permanent destinations for single adults right now, and I do wonder if this is something that might be helpful. I interviewed some singles and families a couple years ago who had gone through rapid rehousing and then lost their housing and were back in rapid rehousing again, and just cost was really the big thing for them. I mean, when I heard how much people were paying, it's like, wow, we really need to have an option that's less expensive than what they're getting right now and everything. And that, if they could find something for $400 or $500, it seems like that would be a lot more sustainable than when they're getting a place that's $700 or $800, which seems like quite a bit. So.
I'm really excited about this because I'm working with a program here in St. Louis that's really kind of reaching out to try to shape programs for high needs folks, like, with substance use disorders or mental illness. And I guess my question to you all is the shared nature of the housing, does that help with the outcomes of people who are, obviously SAMHSA is the one who's having you do the research study. So can you speak a little to how the shared nature of it connects to substance use and mental health? Like, is it better? Is it worse? How is it better? How is it worse than, like, say, single occupancies?
So
Go ahead, Dana.
the reason that this paper will be co-sponsored is it's clearly a HUD first issue, in the sense that HUD's about housing. SAMHSA is about services for people who are experiencing mental health or substance use issues. But the key finding here is that this model of shared housing can work for individuals who are experiencing homelessness, are chronically homeless, have been for a long time, and also are experiencing serious mental illness. So that kind of goes against people's thinking. And even on calls of people running shared housing programs for other populations, we always ask them if they're serving people with serious mental illness, and some said no, this model's not for them. And what's important here to understand is just like anyone, fidelity to the project has to be to the highest standards of permanent supportive housing, right? So that means you have to have a type of housing first framework to it, harm reduction, choice at the center. But all these tools are tools that we found and uncovered that can help you implement that model for frequent utilizers, high need populations. And they are successful out there. And we will invite you, Tim. We'll invite everyone to that group call, I think, with the practitioners. It's a good follow-up for this.
Okay. And just to add on to that too, I know Share LA, where they have a whole bunch of different houses, and the people can choose if they want their house to be an alcohol-free house or a marijuana-free house. So, and then that peer support environment of people who have a shared lived experience really can help with many of the challenges that individuals are facing who may have a history of substance use disorders.
And they were starting at LGBTQ, what do I not know? Anyway, LGBTQ something house. So because, again, you have a really strong missionary guy, and they also have upped their game in letting the politic know that this works. And so that means other funders are coming in and coming to them about wanting to fund them. So it'll be really interesting for you all to actually talk with these folks directly too, with your questions. I think that'll be the best help.
Yeah, we here in Salt Lake, as we've been listening to these slides, some of them were certainly well beyond what we ever thought would even be possible as options, especially pretty much everything that was on the share slide when that first came up. We were just thinking about all those components, and almost every one of them seemed so foreign to us or unworkable to what our experience has been. So we're looking forward to those ongoing discussions about how these strategies have been implemented and been successful.
Yeah, this is a good seating for it.
Yeah, this is Becky, and I'm really glad to hear that you're going to invite us all to the call, because I'm sitting here thinking this is a really exciting model, and we have a critical need for PSH, especially in one of the continuums that we work with. And we've just been racking our brains trying to think how we can increase when there's no more affordable housing really coming in our communities, and no more new funding and things like that. So this is something new that I think I'm going to definitely share with the program people on our team, and I may share that webinar information with them as well.
Yeah. So we want it to be a dialogue somewhat, but you can invite as many people as you want to it, and we'll have a little bit of a presentation mode, but we definitely want this to be a dialogue with folks doing this work. And the other thing is that, how about anyone who has questions, if you sent them to us today, because if you get off this call, you're not going to remember, because that will help us prepare the presenters too. They'll be happy. I mean, this is what they live and breathe. They'll be get happy about this. So
yes, they definitely will be happy to do it. So Jamie, did you want to touch on some of the conflict resolution strategies now?
Yeah, I'll go through these quickly, but honestly, this is it, right? To me, this is the heart and soul of the matter, is how do you successfully support conflict resolution, which does come up. And to be real, some of the places, 2 projects in Connecticut that are doing this, didn't have a lot of supports for the people that they got into housing. They just didn't have the staffing capacity. It's not like they didn't think it was necessary, but they didn't have a housing capacity to do that. But they had the housing vouchers, and they wanted to maximize the housing options, and so they created roommate sharing situations without real staffing support. So these are not happening everywhere, to be clear. These are really, again, the promising practice that we would promote, but it doesn't mean it can't be done without it. You just run into problems, but people also resolve problems. So these are just things that we've already touched upon, and none of them real surprising, actually. And how people carry this out, they might have a staff person on board who's trained in this, or they might actually bring in a real conflict mediation person if that's needed. You know, they're out there in the community. So there are ways to do this within your own staff, and then also bring in external staff who can help with conflict mediation. So they're pretty logical. We can go to the next slide. If you're going to bring your staff, please go ahead and share with them this PowerPoint before, so they get the same background you have, or somewhat of a background. I think it would be really helpful context for anyone new coming onto the call. And so here it just talks about the different ways the different programs actually staffed it and how they would go about the conflict resolution. Share LA is one of the biggest, obviously, and most out there, we think, with promising practices. And they require that the MOU with the landlord, that the landlord call. So they require that the landlord be proactive to the intermediary organization and not wait for the problem to fester or get out of hand. Okay, next slide. So this is showing where some of the things that are kind of wonderful to see, right? 2016 MICA House 81, high barrier single adults, less than 10% return to homelessness. And in Share LA's big point is the cost. The cost of doing shared housing for this population is so far less. He kept telling us that it's so far less than a single cost of one PSH unit. I think their total budget for last year was something like $300,000 for all 50 people they were serving, and comparing that to what it costs to run or develop a single PSH unit was what he was doing. There's not a lot of evaluation on these, but evaluation is just, again, in housing stability that people are seeing over and over again. Next slide. These are some of the admitted challenges. I think one of the big ones here is belief systems also. We presented this at the Alliance Conference, and there was definitely people in the audience, we being Caroline from SAMHSA, there were definitely people in the audience who were not convinced that this was possible for a high need population. And you don't convince them in a presentation like that, but I think one of the big things actually is this place where you can have people talk to the people or visit the sites where shared housing is working. So it's great that we're going to follow up with this call with that experience. And the next one is the benefits, which we really talked about. I think these benefits, like, again, all of this backed into our white paper, which hopefully will see the light of day from a HUD publication. SAMHSA's publication process is a little bit broken anyway, for reasons that have nothing to do with us. But I would actually use this slide in particular when you're selling shared housing to anybody. Go back to thinking, use this slide deck and go back to seeing the positive when you're actually starting to reach out about having people understand what shared housing is. Is that the last slide we have on shared housing?
There are a few more with SAMHSA resources as well that I can flip through.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the big challenges, obviously, we face is how do you take this from the local sites and the early adopters and system level scale up? So I think it's just spreading the knowledge as far as possible and building the toolkit, which we're really excited about, because it has been shown to work to be a cost-effective and successful option. So it's just spreading the message. So here are a list of SAMHSA's resources that may or may not be useful for you. So the links are all within this presentation, which you'll all get a copy of. Well, you did receive a copy of it now, but we're also going to be sending it out with the recording after the call as well. And here are some additional resources. Go ahead.
I want to speak for a minute too on the, just go back one slide. The National Shared Housing Resource Center, this is a center that was set up a long time ago, really targeting the elderly population, maybe. I forget what their original, do you know, Rachel, why they originally started the National Shared Housing?
They're home sharing. So they really target homeowners who have a room that they want to either rent for financial compensation or rent for service exchange. Most of their programs are that model rather than the roommate matching type of shared housing.
And a small percentage of those shared housing programs have begun to serve people experiencing homelessness. But it is, when it comes to belief, we talked to a few of those shared housing providers who did not think the model could work for people with serious mental illness. So it's a very good resource, but it's not a resource serving our population. So we want to grow it from within the homelessness service system where everybody understands our population and can connect that model to it, because it does and is possible, as we found out. So our last slide, this alternative housing, this is really fun to do. Rachel, just flip through the slides. Like we'll go through it. It won't take us very long, like maybe 20 minutes on the next call. We'll try to get to this. You'll get these in the slide deck, but if you just, these are really, really interesting models. We want to touch upon what we learned from them, but 80% of our project was focused on shared housing. 80% of the interest in it, in the expansion by HUD and by SAMHSA is on shared housing. There's a lot of questions about alternative housing, but I can tell you that alternative housing is catching on like small, tiny wildfires. So tiny houses are getting picked up. We're not promoting any of that as a best practice, but they're definitely, cities are picking up the ADUs as a part of what's possible for creating these little tiny houses to be inside of your own home, and you house someone who's experiencing homelessness. There's tiny house villages that have been sprung up, some of which have not have a bad reputation, some of which are stellar. And so we do want to share that information, but we don't want to dive into it. Today we don't have enough time. But it is all about housing options, expanding housing options. So our very last slide does get us to where we're going to end up is really what we're doing next on this community practice. So we do want to get all of you exposed again and utilizing the Data to Action resource URL, and we're going to be building it up with all these resources from the last few community practice sessions. We're going to make sure those are available on the URL that everybody has, and we're going to be going over that next time in November, and we're going to be also supporting each one of you to share a little bit about how you're going to be creating a community practice, applied community practice locally with these resources, because that's really the ultimate goal, right, is that it actually gets applied. But we're going to work with each one of you on that, and we also hope to hear from Tim on next call on the qualitative research approaches that could be applicable to our work and support what we're finding in our HMI data. Is that right, Tim? Are you still on?
Yes, I'm still on and looking forward to it.
Yay. Okay. So we had one in the booked for October 24th. We're not going to have that. Many of us are spending a week in Portland at the NHSDC conference. And so we're going to have our next one. It's in everybody's calendar as November 14th. We'll be talking to each site between now and then, either Sarah or I will be calling folks. And we'll be, again, just prepping you to both using the resources in the URL, so just reminding you of access to it, walking you through that site to make sure that it is user-friendly for you, and helping you think through what might be your next best steps, doing your own community practice plan, so this stuff can go forward. And there we have it. I want to say thank you to Rachel, and Rachel stays with us in helping to support and coordinate and lead topics in our community practice. But she's a stellar colleague in this project that we just finished last Friday. Yay! And more to come with the toolkit. But thank you for the presentation too here, Rachel. It's great.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jamie, and hopefully this really sparked your interest. So please don't hesitate to send us questions, comments, and we can definitely link you directly with providers, as in addition to setting up that call where we can do Q&A with some of the providers that have really had success serving the chronically homeless and severely mentally ill population.
Maybe, Rachel, we can look at the October 24th date for that call, because we just have to convene it, and we can maybe think about that, because that was in people's calendars, from 3 to 4. But we'll make sure our people are available, the guest speakers.
Yep, no, that's a good idea, Jamie.
Okay, good. Any last thoughts from anyone or questions, or we'll see you all on either in Portland or on the October 24th call.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shel.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.